All right, we'll go ahead. So thank you everyone for being here. This panel is Why CPGs Matter, Climate Affordability and Joining CPGs. Our co-hosts for this event are the San Diego County Bicycle Coalition, Climate Action Campaign, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Downtown Partnership. My name is Jesse O'Sullivan. I'm Policy Counsel at Circulate San Diego, and I will let our panel introduce themselves. Philip, do you want to go first?
Sure thing. I'm Philip Belzeski. I served on the University City Planning Group as the student representative, appointed student representative for probably almost half a year. And then now I'm working at a biotech in San Diego.
Great. Chelsea?
Hi, I'm Chelsea Klaseus. I live in Grant Hill, and I have been a board member of the Southeastern San Diego Planning Group. This is my 8th year, and I also serve as secretary.
Great, thank you. Rosa?
Hello, my name is Rosa, and I'm currently serving on the City Heights Area Planning Committee and totaling now 4 years now. And I served as secretary for one of those years.
Great. So to get us started, why don't we'll have somebody explain what a CPG is and what its role is in the planning process. So Chelsea, do you want to take that one?
Sure, yeah. So from my involvement in the community planning group, it's been historically an advisory group to the city. So we, it's an opportunity for community members to have an active role and input into the livability, walkability, culture, and feel of the community that they live in, as projects, specifically, obviously around land use. And so it can be something like installing, like parking, or it could be a stop sign, or it can be something like a 100-unit building in your community. So and CPGs are obviously guided by their own bylaws, but what's mostly exciting is the CPG's historic involvement in the actual planning document for their community. And so as things come to the community planning group, we get to either support or not support a project. And that has historically been then taken back to the city and to the planning commission and to council. We don't decide on projects, but historically the weight of the CPG's recommendation has been taken into consideration. So it's been historically a very valuable community input process. That's the
Great.
short of it, I suppose.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Philip, Rosa, anything you want to add to that?
Exactly what I would have been thinking. I kind of majored this in college, and that's exactly how I would define it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right. Well, then let's go around to each of you and have you share your story of how you got involved in your community planning group. So how you learned about CPGs, why you were interested, and why you decided to become a part of it. So Rosa, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I grew up in City Heights. It's been my community ever since, this is where I was born. And I went to college at UC Santa Barbara, where I studied environmental studies. And one of my emphasis was in environmental law and planning. And so my focus was kind of going into environmental law and planning. And that's where I learned more about community planning groups and city planning groups, and attending one there in the city of Goleta. That it was just very interesting how there's a variety of different topics that what they discuss. And my goal after graduating was to join a community planning group. And it took me a while trying to figure out when and where they met, if we even had one. And finally, after talking to people and networking, I was able to be involved. And after learning about, where and attending a meeting, I quickly applied for one, got on the board, and have been on ever since. Sadly, I won't be renewing for this year just because I am planning on moving, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be moving into a different community, and I don't want to make that commitment and then have to 2 months down the line have to cut out. But it's definitely looking to be involved and learn more, and it's just my community. I love being able to be part of it, have a voice, and kind of give that input as somebody who was born here.
Great, thank you. And what was the process for getting onto the board?
For every community group, it's a little bit different. For mine, it was you had to attend at least one meeting prior. So you had to sign in person. Of course, you would have to sign in on the sheet. Now online, you just make sure you tell the chair if you're interested to give them an email and your contact information. And after that, proven that you have attended at least one meeting, you can then put in your application submitted before the deadline. And after that, you run for election. And during the election, they count the vote. I've also been part of the election process and ran the election the year prior during COVID. So that was a very interesting experience. And then from there, that decides if you are in the board or not. It's I think it was a very good experience for me to have, especially learning that being very new and then being seated right away. It was fun and I enjoyed it.
Cool. Philip, you want to give an answer to the original question?
So the original question was how I got involved, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So how I got involved was through the University of UC San Diego. So I was really sort of scared about the housing crisis. For students, I was a PhD student, and PhD students aren't paid that much. So I was worried about myself and all my colleagues. Where are we going to find housing? I wanted to do something about it. So I was looking at student groups where I might be able to have a say, and then I became the local legislative liaison, which actually holds an appointed seat in the university city planning group. So then I was just immediately able to have a voice in local politics and make an impact in the community plan update and I mean other projects like redistricting and so many other things. Yeah, and like those community projects that are always brought to community planning groups. But yeah, I was really excited about housing and how we can design transportation around more public transportation and making an impact for more sustainable future. So yeah, that's sort of how I got involved and what I was really excited about in it.
Right, and I appreciate that answer. And you're sort of it's a kind of a unique position in the CPGs of having an appointed seat. Can you talk a little bit about why it is that there is an appointed seat for a student and how that process works?
So why there is, I don't know exactly how it started, but I know that there's been an appointed seat for somewhere in the range of 10 years, I believe. But yeah, the University City Planning Group has always included UC San Diego within its borders, sort of. So UC San Diego is one of its main economic and educational powerhouses. So they wanted to get a student representative and faculty and a graduate and undergraduate representation in the group, which is really, I think, it's almost unique in the city. There's only one other student representative, as I'm aware, in the whole city.
But it's also an interesting situation where the students who live on the UC campus can't actually vote in the community planning group elections. They have to rely on
Right.
this representation through an appointed member, which is
That's a good point.
maybe a little problematic.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, because I mean, I think a quarter of University City's population is living on campus. And that's significant. So students are often overlooked.
Mhm.
Just complete. I mean, other than the one student representative, yeah, that's way underrepresented. So.
Great. Well, Chelsea, do you want to tell us how you got involved?
Yeah, sure. It's a little bit full circle because I first got involved with my community planning group because back in 2015, I attended a How to Join Your CPG put on by Circulate San Diego. But back then, it was Colin Parent was filling in your shoes.
My boss.
Sorry.
My boss. He's the executive director now.
Yes, your boss. Well, back then he was policy counsel back in 2015. And I was living in Sherman Heights at the time. I had lived there for a couple of years. I knew I wanted to get involved in my community planning group, but I was really intimidated by it. I was a renter, and I didn't think that my voice as a renter would be taken seriously, even though I knew I had lived there for several years and I wanted to continue living in that neighborhood. And I was invested, my time, my money, just living in the community. I wanted to be a positive contributor to the community. So I also knew that there were a lot of people at the time, right? So after the economic downturn of 2008, 2009, it kind of wreaked havoc on the housing stock and the housing market, especially in our neighborhood. And a lot of properties that were going into foreclosure were becoming flips. And there were a lot of people trying to come into the neighborhood and sort of wield their money in a way that felt like if the community members did not get involved and have a unified voice, that the people who were coming in from outside of the community would, basically dictate what the community was going to be. So I was lucky enough to, attend the How to Join Your CPG. At that time, I was super encouraged by what I was hearing. And then at the end of that meeting, I actually met 2 city planners, told them sort of my hesitation, and they, fully endorsed just getting involved and doing it. So I got my 3 meetings. Obviously this was after elections, but my planning group requires 3 meetings before you can join. There happened to be a vacancy in July. So my first election was actually an appointment to the board. I have subsequently obviously been reelected a number of times. And actually funny story, my very first meeting, as a sitting board member, the secretary didn't show up, and they asked me if I would be kind enough to fill in, and I've been filling in for 7 years. So another thing I wanted to mention, because the question I think was, how did you learn about it? Why were you interested, and why did you decide to run? So a couple other things is just, planning groups are so powerful, and diversity in those groups are so important. And first being able to join and being encouraged as a renter, I think was so important, and being able to be taken seriously was something that I wasn't anticipating. And being able to, the other big deal was that they were in the process of doing outreach and feedback for an updated community plan. And so when I was elected to the board, I actually got to be a part of the board that passed our updated plan. And I knew that was something important that I wanted to contribute to.
Great, thank you. Next question, what was a time that you got to make an impact on an issue that you cared about? Philip, you want to go first this time?
Sure. So something that I was really excited about and passionate about was the University City plan update, which it happens every approximately 30 years, and it's a long-term plan, 30-year plan that sort of sets the precedence for how much housing and commercial land use is going to be designated for development. So it sets sort of maximums of growth for the next 30 years. And this plan update really took into consideration the community voice, which they were working, the community planners were really working closely with the University City Planning Group and students. And so I got to work hand in hand with the city planners throughout a lot of the process. And we got more involvement and really brainstormed together what would be the most beneficial outcome for the whole community, for where to develop, how much housing would be ideal for conservation and housing prices, and just making sure that land use is equitable, because right now the prices really are not in a place where people can move into the community and find a life here, or at least not starting off anyways. You have to be already of a certain socioeconomic class, which, yeah, that's sort of the opposite of equitable. So yeah, really we've focused around transit centers. The trolley opened. It was a really exciting time. So that was something that I was really excited about.
Great, thank you. How about you, Chelsea?
I will actually echo what Philip sort of said. So I got to join the board at a time when we were updating our community plan. By the time I joined, there had already been a year or two of community involvement, which I participated in, but not as an official board member. And one thing I'm most proud about is there was a lot of spirited discussion during that process around upzoning in density around transit centers, and nobody could agree upon that. But because it was one of the options outlined in the EIR, myself and another board member were able to sort of beat everyone else to the button and make the recommendation to approve the plan with support of the option in the EIR to upsize. So that was the motion that got passed, but we still had to make sure that the planning group did, listen to that and put it into the recommendation, the staff recommendation, because the staff recommendation didn't include that when it finally came through. And then I was able to also speak at City Council as a part of that agenda, and the council was able to pass, when they passed the plan, they did actually take the recommendation to upzone, even though it wasn't originally part of the planning staff recommendation. So we have the 20, not every planning group already has trolley lines running through it. And so it was so important for us to be able to really maximize that. So we have 25th Street and 32nd Street, and we were able to increase the zoning density for those areas. And I know it maybe sounds like not a big deal, but back in 2015, 2016, that it was a big deal. And so it's one of my prouder moments.
Great, thank you. How about you, Rosa?
I think for me, it's able to kind of be that voice from my community. I currently work my original plan when I graduated college was to go into planning, to be an environmental planner, to be a biologist through an environmental planning firm. But over time, I really fell in love with education through a fellowship, and that's what I do now. And one of the topics is actually like, learning about what the students can do in their community to help reduce the amount of carbon dioxide emissions and climate change. So being able to be part of that voice and be able to tell them like, this is something you can do, and it's not something you have to start when you're an adult. And especially, having youth seats on our planning committee is like really amazing and fantastic. And I hope, see one of those students on that board one day. And taking into account, their future, their safety is also really important. On field trips, when they have to come to our building, which is in City Heights, for my work, is they have to walk. Some of them have to walk a few blocks, and being able to have that safety in mind for them, being able to like report the things that are issues, or creating more calming traffic measures for them to walk. City Heights is a very transit-oriented community. People walk, people bike, people take public transportation, they drive. So making sure those are accessible for everybody, and knowing that there are like, these safety things and safety measures that are installed, like roundabouts on a main street that, I've walked my students down from their school over, and they haven't had an issue, and that they feel safe. I think that's what I'm very happy for them to be able to be enjoying those things as students.
Right. That safety is a big deal, and it's at the intersection of both just like safety and living your life, and also climate. Cool. So how can somebody who hasn't been involved before get involved in their community planning group? Chelsea, you want to take that?
Sure, yeah. So, being here at this meeting is like step one, just understanding feedback and how it kind of works with different planning groups. Attend meetings. Honestly, that is the biggest suggestion I have, is just to attend meetings, to get if you don't already, to get the feel for the group, to get the feel for, the agendas and what's kind of coming up every month. See how the board works, and understand the different dynamics. If you want to run for the board eventually, or just be involved, but run for the board eventually, sometimes, depending on the bylaws of the planning group you're in, they do allow non-board members to serve on subcommittees. So you could be like a member of the, just be attending the meetings, but not a board member, but you can still get involved in some subcommittees, again, depending on bylaws. I don't know where everyone in this webinar Zoom meeting is from. So, this is not medical advice. And I would just say, like, also get to know the other people who go, who attend, but also introduce yourself to the board members and express, interest if you do have it. But again, I think sometimes if you don't go to community planning group meetings, sometimes people have an idea of what it is and what they do. So getting a few meetings under your belt, if that's possible, to really get a feel for it, if it's something that you want to actually like commit yourself to, is great. And also then you get used to that time just being taken every month. So
yeah, great advice. I also put a link in the chat to the city website where you can find agendas for the community planning groups. I don't think it's always up to date, but it's at least a good place to start. Rosa, do you have anything more on that?
I think it's like great to be able to come to meetings like this that give you a like general idea of how it works, as well as attending, talking to them. That's definitely exactly what Chelsea said. And sometimes you may also find yourself being busy. I know my community has a lot of people that work 2-3 jobs, and they can't really be that voice or attend those meetings as often to be, be part of the committee. but just being attending, even if you're not able to do it 1 year, well, you have those meetings under your belt for the next year. Leadership workshops. I know like at least there are some nonprofits in like each community that have leadership workshops to learn if you're kind of scared to be able to voice your opinion or a little bit shy. That's definitely a place to like grow a community and grow your voice, because definitely that was my case. Even though I studied environmental planning, environmental law in school, I was still not very outspoken. So I was really glad to have that support so that I can be able to voice my opinions when it was necessary during those meetings. And I just, I'm very, very glad for those. And yeah, that's, I think, a little bit of what helped me go on that path, is having those leadership workshops before going into a planning group.
Yeah, I'm currently doing a leadership workshop, and definitely very valuable. Philip?
Yeah. So what I would add is, going off of some of what Chelsea was saying, there are subcommittees, and you can have your voice heard even without being a board member. There's often public comment for any motion. So anything that you have an opinion on, you'll have a couple minutes to voice your opinion. So yeah, just go to the meetings, get involved right away. You could even just go and ask questions. If you're asking the right questions, you could get people to think about things in a different way, start making a difference. Subcommittees. Oh yeah, then you gain familiarity with the different opinions that are represented in your planning group. Oftentimes elections are uncontested, so go be the one that and bring friends. Like, all you need is a few friends to vote for you sometimes. Just bring friends to the meetings, get your minimum requirements to vote, get involved immediately. Like, you don't need any specialization. A lot of these people don't. You just are a member of the community, and that is your qualification. So
Right.
Yeah, I think
right.
that's
I like that. Being a member of the community is your qualification. Also, another thing that you mentioned is how sometimes the elections are uncontested. And so I think it's worth knowing that different community planning groups can be really different, both in terms of their bylaws and in terms of how the elections play out. So on our last panel, one of our panelists, DK, he is on the Midway Community Planning Group. He got on the Midway Community Planning Group by showing up to a meeting, and somebody said, "Hey, we don't have enough people. Why don't you just join?" And he had to be like, "Hey, hold on a minute. Let me think about it first." And then after a few months, he went ahead and joined. Whereas, elections at the Uptown or North Park community planning groups can have, hundreds of people turning out to vote, and the elections can be really competitive. So it really depends a lot on your neighborhood. Turning to our next question, so climate change and housing affordability are two really major issues facing San Diego today, and indeed facing the nation and the world. So, climate change being this threat to so many different things about the way we do things, and it being this challenge of how do we reduce carbon emissions. And then affordability, housing prices went up. I think the price of a home in San Diego to buy went up 40% during the pandemic, which is like crazy. And so, people's incomes did not go up 40% during the pandemic. So how do those considerations of climate and housing affordability affect the way that you make decisions when you're on your community planning group? Rosa, do you want to take that one first?
Sure, definitely. I guess that's for the next week. We're finishing up teaching our 7th graders about climate change, and it's a very heavy topic because we teach them about how climate change tends to impact low socioeconomic communities a lot because they don't have the resources to be able to combat climate change, and that shouldn't be the case. And definitely that's one of the things that I think about when I make these decisions, or decide to vote for something or against, is whether that is going to be reflective of my community, as well as how is it going to be cumulatively, if it's going to just benefit our community or if it's going to benefit everyone else except for us. And I think that's one of the things, especially having as a community planning group, is being able to analyze and find what in your community is the priority. And for us, definitely we would love to have a better canopy, more access to public transportation, more frequent stops and routes, because then there'd be less cars, less uses of cars. One of our schools, they decided to build a highway right next to an elementary school, and that the amount of asthma in just that school area is ridiculously high. That should have never been a consideration, knowing the health impacts on those students. And I definitely want to be able to like think of those things, because I don't want that, like my decisions, to create those problems in the future. I want them to think overall what is going to benefit us and what is going to help out. So, definitely pinpointing that, and it helps out my job, creates potential climate leaders or planning leaders that are going to help their community out. So definitely thinking about my students, thinking about what I want to see them in their future, and change their mind around, because a lot of things that they say are like, oh, there's no hope for my community. Oh, it's going to be really sad. Everybody's going to move out. It's going to be really bad. And definitely, I don't want that for them. And so definitely I'm here to voice their opinions as well.
Right, yeah. A number of great points there, but I'm noticing that both that the climate crisis will have a disproportionate impact on low-income people, and also that our policies in terms of where we've located highways and all of those other sorts of decisions have already had a disproportionate impact on low-income people and people of color. Philip, do you want to take that one next?
So just to restate, I want to make sure I have the question correct, because I was sort of captured by Rosa's response. I was, yeah.
The question was, how do you consider housing affordability and climate when you're making decisions as a community planning group member?
Yes. Okay. So San Diego is growing. It is going to keep growing. You can limit it, but you really need to have new development in very strategic ways to really build the new future that we need to mitigate climate change. I mean, so in the decisions for zoning and I mean the community plan update and everything like that, I was really trying to advocate for decisions and zoning land use scenarios where there would be the most density right around transit centers, so that there would be a lot less requirement for people to have cars, for people to be living closer to where they work. So there's less transportation, or less cars on the road at any given time. So really just trying to think long-term, like once the land use scenario is achieved, sort of once that is fulfilled, what will that look like? And how will people be living in this space in a different way than they do now? Because we need to change the paradigm a little bit, so that there's less need for driving. And I really try to think about it that way.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that answer. Chelsea?
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that climate change impacts the way in which I, review our projects that come before the board, as well as vote on those projects. I live in Southeastern San Diego. We are in general a built out community surrounded by highways, historically disenfranchised as far as being under-resourced with infrastructure, et cetera. infrastructure upgrades. And so climate change is something very important in any ways that I can, advocate and support projects that come before the board. I do so. So whether or not a project, a housing project is big or small, a lot of times we can't hold up a project, obviously, but like supporting any and all kinds of green building practices for those projects. But in addition to that, like Sandag has some bikeway projects going on. Imperial is one of them, which is smack dab in the middle of our district. And so supporting those bike lanes. I think they're about to bid out construction, hopefully. I think after a couple of years of not hearing anything about it, they're coming to our April meeting to discuss the next steps for the bike lanes. And I know that anytime bike lanes, I don't know why it's so, whatever, anytime bike lanes come up, it's a very divisive issue. And so being on the board as a bike rider myself and my wife, and we have an 18-month-old that has a bike seat, and getting to ride in other communities that have protected bike lanes with my family has been important. I also know getting those cars off the road is huge for climate change. And so ultimately I want to not just support green building practices, but support multimodal options within the community to promote health and well-being. And I think, climate as it relates to the sort of, transportation corridors, as you can't really talk about that without also talking about, making it safe, like making infrastructure safe to promote walkability and to promote bike riding and things like that. So yeah, that's what I'll add.
Right, thank you. If anybody in the audience has any questions they want to ask, you can feel free to put those in the chat box now, and we'll try our best to answer them. Give it a minute. Rachel Graham has a question. And Harry, I see your hand is up. Right now, we're just taking questions through the chat box, so if you could type it in. Brian, thanks for coming. Glad you appreciated it. Rachel says, I'd love to hear how the panelists got up to speed on the issues that their community planning group was facing. Did they meet with other members outside of the scheduled meetings, etc.? I'll let anybody who wants to jump in on that one.
I'll just quickly start. I am not sure if I take this to be like a more general question of like, what are the types of things that generally come to the CPG? For me personally, it was just being in the community, being a member of the community, so being tapped into that, but then also just attending meetings to see like what were the concerns being brought up. If we're talking, so just being there, listening, participating from the audience, and if it's up to speed on the issues, like a specific issue, then I mean, like us as board members can't like meet together outside of meetings without it being noticed and formed and all that. But yeah, just being plugged into other community groups. People tend to be, if they're passionate about it, they tend to speak up about it. And so if it's specific things, we have our agendas beforehand. And so we do research, and sometimes if a project's coming up, I drive by the property to see what it looks like, to see where it is, and kind of. And then the other thing is, again, talking about diversity within the CPG is so important. And I think Rachel's question kind of also gets to this, because it can sometimes be an echo chamber, and CPGs can sometimes be heavily monochromatic. And so diversity of neighborhoods and backgrounds is very important for CPGs. And so if a community member shows up from the like the actual neighborhood this thing's being taken care of, or if someone on the planning group is from an area that is being directly impacted, and maybe it's like in a different neighborhood than mine, we do take that very seriously. The things that I would say gets a little bit disheartening is when something is a really big issue, and then nobody comes to speak on it. And so, we can do what we can outside of the meetings, but a lot of times if people aren't showing up to the meetings to either speak in favor or against, it's really hard to kind of get to the bottom of it, except for your own, involvement in the community. So I know that's a little bit, but.
You definitely had a lot of great points. I'd like to add to it. I was sort of thrown into the position, and I had to catch up really quickly. So I did meet with the chair of my CPG, and we talked about a few things. Like, he got me up to speed. He didn't really weigh in with his opinions, but he told me about the issues. I did meet with some other members just briefly, just to talk to them about what their positions are, just to understand a little better the landscape of it. But I was very connected with the city council members' office. I was meeting monthly with representatives from Joe LaCava's office and the city planner that was on the planning group update, or no, the city plan update, sorry. And I was just trying to really get involved in every single way that I could with the groups that are actually the final voice in the decision, and hear from them what their interests are, what we can help with, maybe represent the people that I know a little better. And I was spending a lot of time talking to all my friends about all the things that are happening, hearing what they have to say about it. My friends, my colleagues, anyone I would meet. So I would, to list it more succinctly, I would find out from the agenda and from the other city planning group members what's happening, and then I would figure out what what the stances currently are, figure out my stance based on my opinions and the people around me that maybe aren't represented, and then I would go from there. Yeah.
Appreciate that answer, Philip. Rosa, I think you're probably the most prepared out of anybody could be, since you were born in City Heights, lived there, and then went and studied environmental science and planning for 4 years, and then came back. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, ever since I also was like really young, I would be really involved with my community. I have a sister who's 10 years older than me. My parents were also very involved with the parent involved with the schools, and definitely I grew up in a time where there was a lot of redevelopment in my community. So the whole point of redevelopment was to benefit the youth. And with that, a lot of our youth was involved with a lot of things. We did a lot of things in the community, with the library, with the rec center, with our school. Of course, it dwindled down and less funding was provided as it went on. And that's something we are voicing our opinion on, because we have these public services that, we fought for. And then for it to be ignored, or like even some things even completely shut down. It was like one of the issues definitely there that are being brought up again, because having that stable commitment that was promised to us from the very beginning, we want to be able to have that, not just, you know, come in to give us a talk and then just bail out afterwards, because that's one of the things that we've had so many times where that's happened, to the point where like the community members just doesn't know who to trust. And it's very sad because, you know, they want to be able to voice their opinion and they can't. And it, you know, there's people that take on that role instead now and become like the community liaison. Definitely growing up, being part of like learning more about planning, I learned when I did an internship as a high school student through the YMCA, doing a college class at San Diego State through Hoover High School about sociology. And then, of course, going to school there, one of the things that they focused on is learning more about your community, because definitely analyzing those things as to how your community came about, because planning has a lot to do with what are the current social and economic negatives that are happening in your community, what are the problems and issues, and a lot of it has to do with planning, how the community lays out, because that affects how everything else develops. So, you know, a lot of it talks about, you know, like trying to keep our business sustainable, businesses in like the main corridor, affordable housing, just overall safety, road maintenance, sidewalk improvements. It all has to do with how poorly our city was planned. Well, not a city, my community was planned. And so being able to dig into the history was also really important, knowing like, well, what that leads into the issues that we are facing here today and how we can move on so that in 40 years from now, we don't continue having those issues or having even worse issues and keep on improving from there. And now most of the things that I do is going out and like being part of the things. If like somebody from the city council office or from the like community or nonprofit, they talk about there's a meeting going on here where we're discussing this, or, you know, this is like a Zoom online meeting through the city of San Diego. I will do my best to attend it, and it's very informative. You get to learn. You're like, maybe there should have been more outreach that was done here prior to this decision, or you know, this was like a really nice experience, and, you know, I would hope to continue, you know, on this pathway. Or it just leads into more in-depth analysis on some of the topics we kind of briefly discussed about during our planning meetings. And it's pretty nice to be able to go out there and be more involved in the community.
I appreciate that. All right, we have coming up to time here, so we're going to do last question. Try to give your 1 minute answer, just one quick piece of advice for somebody who wants to get involved in the community planning group, something that we haven't covered yet. So Philip, I'll let you go first.
Sure. So yeah, I would just say there's so many people in this city trying to find things to contribute to. There's funding that's untapped. There are officials looking for positions to spearhead. There's budgets that like will expire. I mean, just finding something to back and then finding the right people to tell it to, like having an idea, finding the right people, you can make things happen like in surprising ways. Just know your positions, know what you want to get done. There are people that want that done also, and then just need the right voice, need the right idea, you know. So just be open to serendipity. Yeah, open to those opportunities.
Great, thank you. Chelsea?
I'll just reiterate that if, you know, just advice-wise, really just attend meetings, understand the bylaws, go to the city's website. It'll tell you, you know, when all these meetings occur. You can look back at past meeting minutes to kind of get a feel for it. But just honestly, and right now, some CPGs are still doing virtual meetings, and so it's like really, really like low entry barrier, as long as the time frame works with your time frame. You don't even have to like physically drive somewhere if they're still doing Zoom meetings. And it'll just really help you to understand if it's something that you truly want to get involved in and you know, lend your voice to. Most terms are between 1 and 3 year terms, and so it is a commitment. It's not just something that you know, kind of show up to, and it is something that, you know, for the sake of your community, and if you're going to be a voice of the community, it really does, you know, it really does, you know, the process needs you to think critically and to be really engaged, because sometimes it can get kind of disheartening. But one thing we didn't touch on that I just wanted to mention was like another thing that comes before CPGs is CIP priorities, capital improvement project priorities for your community. So I just wanted to like tag that because it is something that you get to be involved in. So you can make a significant impact if land use is sort of your thing. And so, or no, I'm sorry, this is land use, but like Philip said, your only qualification is being a resident of that community. So I will tell you what I was told. If you feel intimidated, please just go for it. And if you want to connect after, you know, message me on the little messenger and we can connect.
All right, last one.
Exactly. Just diving into it. I think that's one of the things that if you are hesitant, you can always, like, you know, talk to people, network, learn a little bit more about community planning groups and their role. If you're, because I know this is just a brief night, but if you want to go more in depth, of course. But I, as someone who studied it, who lived there, I was super scared. I didn't have much confidence, but I took that leap of faith and I don't regret it at all. I think it was, you know, I only attended one meeting, I ran and I got in, and it was the scariest thing I had in a while, and it was, I don't regret it at all because I got to learn so much more about my community, got to meet some amazing people, learn more about that work, got to be involved with some of their work that they do in the community. And so I definitely recommend, if you're the type of person to kind of keep on backing away, the more you keep on thinking about it, just go for it. And you'll learn along the way. Ask your chairperson. They would love probably to like inform you and give you on the loops because they've probably been at it for a while and they're like, we want new blood. And they are, you know, talk to the other people about what they do for work, and then also connect with your community, like the City of San Diego planning rep. And I think that's also a really, really good place to talk to them if they email you back, because they're not always the best at emailing you back. I will be honest about that.
All right, well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you to everybody who attended. This will be on YouTube tomorrow. If you want to watch it again, or if you thought it was really informative, you can send it to your friends. Yeah, have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thank you for having me.